We have a very large and very illustrious panel on the session today. What we're going to do is we're going to intersperse some clips from the programme with some insights into the often incredibly hairy story of how you do a live broadcast from a piece of tin moving many thousands of miles around the Earth. So lots of great stories about production. We have here, in order of sitting next to me, we have David Glover from Channel 4. We have Tom Brisley from Arrow Media. We have Sally Dixon from Arrow. Mark Atkin, the multi-platform commissioner at Channel 4. We have Nick Cross from Rocket. Sorry? Crossland, sorry, it's a spelling mistake machine. Nick Crossland from Arrow Media. And finally, the end there with Annabel McLeod, who led on the social stuff. So we'll be covering all the aspects of the project during the next hour and a half, and there'll be plenty of time for you guys to ask some questions at the end as well. We're going to start, in many ways, near the end. We're going to show a clip from the first live broadcast, but before we do, David, I want you to kind of paint us a picture for everyone sat here in the audience about what it felt like in those last few minutes before the very first live broadcast from the ISS.
Yeah, well, basically, so I was kind of, when you're the commission into these things, you don't really have to do anything, you just sort of observe it, really. So I was just, it's like being strapped into a roller coaster while these guys kind of drive it magnificently. But it was absolutely terrifying. I mean, I should say maybe start off with that, maybe the greatest thing I've ever been involved in my TV career. I absolutely loved it and thank these guys for making it. But I kind of want to give you a warts and all kind of vibe of what it was like to be involved in it. So basically, we wanted to start our live lap of the planet with this shot where you kind of swoop down to the cupola, which is the window on the Earth. So we wanted to start with a kind of the astronauts floating with the camera down, looking down into the cupola, through the cupola, and then you see planet Earth revealed live. So we'd start live from space. But there were a few things against us. So to give you the kind of vibe of what it was like, basically, the signal from the International Space Station comes and goes. So you never quite know when we're going to have a live signal link-up. And a couple of hours before we're going on air, they say to us, you should have the signal back between 2 minutes and 30 seconds before you're on air. So that's the sort of thing. And Dermot O'Leary has a script for if we do have the signal, and a B script for if we don't have the signal. A or B, A or B, A or B. Yeah. Then there's also, we're in these trucks, and there's a massive lightning storm overhead. So bad that NASA say on their campus, no one's allowed to leave the trucks for fear of being hit by lightning. And then also, we're being told we're not allowed on the floor of mission control. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to tell this story, but I'm going to anyway. Basically, we're not allowed to go onto the floor of mission control. We say, why not? And they say, well, we haven't told the astronauts, but there is actually space debris heading towards the space station at this moment, like a real-life gravity. And you're not allowed to put that in your program, but we are going to, after your program, have to move the space station. And then, basically, there's shit flying towards the space station, and it may blow up. So I'm thinking, okay, well, fair enough, you know. This all sounds terrifying. And then basically we're waiting for the signal, and 2 minutes before we're on air, there's still no signal. And Dermot's going, do you want me script A or script B? And we're staying confident. We're going script A, script A, script A. 30 seconds before we're live on air from space, and it's still no signal. And they're going script A, script B, script B. We're like degenerate gamblers. Script A, let's go for it. We're going to get the signal, aren't we? And then 8 seconds before we're on air, the signal comes into our truck. We're in space. Bang, we're live on air, and we're cheering in the truck pretty much, or I'm just like holding on white knuckle ride.
Let's run that first clip now to get an idea where we are.
Right now, these images are coming live from the International Space Station. You are looking currently at the west coast of America, heading down California towards the Baja Peninsula. And that is a beautiful, beautiful sight. San Diego's coming up. I'm doing a couple of 360s. You see the Baja Peninsula right down there as well. Stunning. And that is what we are here for. This is Live from Space, Lab of the Planet. Join us as we take you around the world on a trip of a lifetime.
So actually, when I watched that, I thought that was sheer awe in Dermot's voice. I'm now realising it was actually knicker-wetting relief.
That's right. Yeah,
so let's zoom back from that moment and talk about how the project came about. So First of all, I mean, David, before we hand over to Tom and hear our side of the story, where did this come from at Channel 4? Was space, I mean, space is not something that Channel 4 has really kind of covered before, so where did the kind of interest come from?
Well, nowhere. I mean, basically, yeah, the accepted wisdom basically is space doesn't rate, you know. Although I suppose the solar system does, and Brian Cox going, it's amazing. But generally, we don't really do space. So no, it was just it's purely Tom brought it in the door and immediately was thrilled by the idea. But it's totally Tom.
So Tom, where did life from space start?
It's an easy sell, isn't it? Life from space. What's not to like? It started with the Science Congress, the World Congress of Science and Factual Producers, back in 2011, where there were many panels, one of which was from a Japanese broadcaster who had made a little show where they had a short link-up with the space station, and thank you. Hello. With a link up with the space station with a Japanese astronaut who happened to be on there, and I thought, well, that's quite good. That feels like a TV stunt. And we did some research, and then we worked out that actually over 90 minutes, the space station made a complete orbit at Earth. And I thought, oh, that's a real premise for an event and a live event. So without any conversations with NASA, without anything, I went to David and said, come on, David, this is something that Channel 4 should embrace. And they did straight away. David was all up for it. Basically, because you wanted to meet the astronauts as well, which was one of the things.
But you didn't have access at that point. You'd had no conversations at all.
But I thought
I thought he did. But interesting that.
Yeah.
It's all coming out now. But
I suppose the bottom line is that if the Japanese broadcaster had done it, I thought there was a way that we could do it. So we then contacted NASA. Ridiculous question, you know, could we do a live show from the International Space Station? And their answer, first of all, was no, we never do anything live. And I said, but you have done it live for NHK. So long story short, we put in a request, and after a lot of conversations, they said maybe you could just go and have a visit to the astronauts at Johnson Space Centre. And slowly but surely, it was a question of gaining trust and explaining the idea. And I went out and had an initial recce, and then David came out with me and had an initial recce. And I think one of the turning points was the Paralympics trailer that was made for Channel 4, and we showed that, and David said, I wanted to show the astronauts like that. I want the astronauts to be characters and stand out and tell the warts and all story. And the astronauts that were in the room, there were about 5 different astronauts in the room, all turned around and said, yeah, so do we. And we knew at that moment that they were starting to warm up. And generally with NASA, when the astronauts say, I want it to happen, you stand a pretty good chance of making it happen. And so it was dealing with the corporate side of NASA, but also dealing with the astronauts and getting the astronauts to embrace it and want to do it.
There's a funny thing, actually, just that meeting is quite nerve-wracking. We go into the NASA boardroom to meet the astronauts to sell our project. And I was just got off a plane, and it was kind of, my plane had unbelievable nightmare plane journey, terrible turbulence, and I was completely jet-lagged. And I was wanting to moan to them, and I was thinking, I can't really moan about turbulence and jet-lag to a bunch of fucking astronauts. They're coming from other planets, these guys. But yeah, no, it was kind of amazing, wasn't it? It was sort of, I suppose the central idea, the thing that really tickled us, and Tom's first idea was this lap of the planet, and the idea of basically saying kind of a bit like a pilot says over this flight, if you look out the left window you'll see Vegas, if you look out the right window you'll see LA or whatever. That kind of idea of could we give the experience of like being on a plane only for the whole world, and the sort of that was where the start was, wasn't it? That
Yeah.
was your
And
idea.
was this, when was this? Was this post kind of, because obviously NASA have had a huge viral hit with Greg Hadfield and Space Oddity. Was this pre...
Oh, this was way before
Yeah,
that.
so NASA, how media savvy were they? Were they looking for these kind of opportunities, or was it a really, really tough ask?
I think NASA in America had a really tough time with their home market, because the space shuttle wasn't flying anymore. People just assumed that NASA was out of the space race, and so I think that's what they embraced at the end of the day, an opportunity to show that NASA was still alive and kicking and flourishing and doing all this amazing stuff. And the other thing we noticed at those meetings is the astronauts were so cool. They were just ordinary people doing an extraordinary job, and you're in the meeting and they'd say, oh, sorry, I've got to go now to pick up the kids from school. And it was just this real contrast between these guys, you know, men and women who go up onto the space station and risk their life to progress mankind or humankind, and then they're going to pick their kids up at the end of the day from school. And they were just real people. And I thought, wow, to see those real people living their life on the space station was a fantastic golden opportunity.
This is a lovely point to bring in. Can we just show clip 3 to see some of the footage from the astronauts up in the ISS?
I'm Koji Wakata from Japan. I've been an astronaut with the Japanese Space Agency for 22 years. Life on board is a bit like camping, really. We don't have running water, so we cannot have showers, which I really miss. But we have to get used to it because we're out here for 6 months.
I really enjoy this moment when this warm towel passes my face. It's so refreshing.
So that's actually from the first of the 3 programs, the astronauts living in space. Then you had Houston, We Have a Problem. Obviously, you got access to a huge amount of archive footage. What was your kind of conversations with NASA about accessing the kind of content they had already?
That program, by the way, was the most challenging of all the 3 that we made, because there's no director. They're directing it themselves, and we ended up. I remember there was this room where all of us were in the room, and this footage came in, and we just had some selects that they were sending down, and we just looked at it gobsmacked. That toothbrush you could look at for about an hour. It's just so amazing. And everyone was going, oh, David was going, it's pure gold, it's pure gold. and then came the challenge of how you turn that gold into an hour's documentary. And that was really, really tough, because it was lots of abstract images that they'd filmed of their life, and we tried to give them the best, I suppose, the best advice that we could, but at the end of the day, it was up to them what they filmed.
So you're directing the most outside broadcast anyone's ever done.
Yeah.
How many shots did you get? How many windows for them filming and sending stuff? What was that whole relationship like? Were you having to send them instructions to film and then see footage coming down later?
And it was, it was Janice Sutherland who directed that show, who had the relationship with them. Not directly, it was via their wives sometimes, it was via the astronauts' contact in Houston, and any means possible to get some direction to them to actually, could they do that, but could they make it like this? And sometimes we wanted them to do pieces to camera like Koichi did when he was washing his face, and sometimes we wanted them to film just their life and put the camera on a wide shot. And getting that combination right was incredibly challenging. And it was the first rough cut was a challenge, the second rough cut was a challenge, and Janice had this amazing vision to get them to actually narrate the show. And when they did that, it all came good. And as soon as they recorded their story and their life story, and you matched that with the pictures, it took on a life of its own. It became a really, really fascinating observation of
So they weren't natural storytellers. You were having to do quite a lot of work.
No, it's interesting. I'm basically, because I typically got a bit overexcited to start off with, said it was pure gold, and then after watching hours of them floating around, it began to look like looking at an aquarium with fish sort of swimming past, and it became like really soporific and actually kind of slightly sending you to sleep. So, but actually what we did is we had these kind of phone calls to the space station, which Sally's really the superstar in this, and basically Sally was the person who would talk to the astronauts, and we'd literally, do you want to describe the situation? Because they were thrilling meetings. I just, again, observed them. But
So you were having like conference calls with them in the ISS?
Yeah, well, for some months we didn't have any direct contact with them. It was via email, via another astronaut. So we'd say, could you film this for us? Could you film that? We have these long lists, which they just weren't used to doing. Then we'd have to wait for the footage to come back and be sent from NASA. We'd look at it, give feedback, and wait for the next batch to come. So it was very slow. And as time went by, we sort of felt it's really important that we talk to them in some way on the space station. And they were feeling that as well, Rick and Koichi and Mike Hopkins. So eventually a day was, agreed that we would have a call from the space station. We were sitting around, and then I would speak to them. But we were sitting around the conference table at Arrow, and, we're there 10 minutes early, and the phone rings, and it's at NASA calling, 8 minutes to hook up. And 6 minutes, and we have 15 minutes with them because their time is charged out at $78,000 an hour, and at 3 astronauts for 15 minutes is 45 minutes in all. So you just had to be really focused, thank them for what they'd done, but also try and sort of move things on, and because they're used to doing things where they take a sort of toothbrush and say, this is how I brush my teeth. There's no water, so I use a bag, I put toothpaste on. And we didn't want that. We just wanted them to brush their teeth and not say anything about what they were doing, talk about something else. So that was one category, just do your normal stuff, and to see the toothbrush just hover is amazing. Some things we needed a bit of explanation, like a science experiment, but we wanted them to be as natural as possible, and that took some doing. They were used to sort of planting their feet under a bar, standing upright, which we didn't want. We wanted them to float. So these conference calls were really helpful, because I think they literally felt remote from the process, because they didn't have, normally with contributors, you'd be speaking to them, well done, going back, director would be talking them through things, and we couldn't do that. So they were very helpful, and we had 2 or 3 of these calls talking about the live show, and they said an amazing phrase as we got nearer to the live shows, that we're more worried about screwing up than blowing up. They're such perfectionists that they didn't want to let us down. And so those calls were really exciting and really important, and really sort of encouraging them, but asking them to go that bit further out of their comfort zones.
Because I guess, many of the astronauts, they're engineers, they're pilots, they're used to being checklisted and, organised to within a millisecond of their lives.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
you had to get them to loosen them up.
Yes, well they are. They're very, very detailed orientated. Everything has to be sort of logged. The script had to be in incredible detail, where they'd be, what the camera angle would be that we wanted, because they're very much used to delivering to a very detailed brief, and they wanted the script very early, so we had to sort of block out their parts early on. And although the Dermot's part may have changed, their parts had to really stay locked in from 2 weeks before the show. But they were really keen to do well and to get the message across, because as has been said, people have forgotten about space. I had, I remember the shuttle, even the landing on the moon, but space was in the back of my mind. And when I was asked to do this programme, at first I thought, oh God, if it's all about the biggest thrust and the biggest rocket and things, it's not really me. But when it was clear it was about the people and what it's like to be an astronaut, it really sort of lit up for me. And what we also wanted to do was not only show an astronaut in the round, also to involve their families. And so being allowed to meet their wives was a first. When I went to one of the wives, the guys' houses, the person from NASA said this is unheard of, to come to an astronaut's house. And the wives were really supportive. And Janice worked a lot with them to get them to film, the two-way conversation. So the astronauts would film at their end on the space station, because they have once a week video hookups with their family, and then the wives would be filming at their end, so we'd get both ways.
I think we've got a clip of the ice hockey match and the Thanksgiving, if we can just show... no, we've got a clip of the food parcel before that. Can we go to clip 5 first, or can we go to clip 4? We'll go to clip 5. Okay, so we're just going to show one of these moments from the families and the astronauts talking together.
But the lovely thing now, as we start and whatnot, is there is contact with them, which kind of roughly might like. I know we saw this the other day, which is such a nice shot. This is you watching one of your sons playing ice hockey from space. Yeah. That must be, how's that for you? Because, obviously the picture must be a bit shaky, but you're still able, for like 250 miles above the earth, you're still able to watch your son play ice hockey. And he's still like,
You're absolutely fantastic. It's funny because, the quality of the image from that distance wasn't the best, but, when you watch your kids play sports, you can kind of get them out, how they move and everything like that. So I was able to follow it, and that probably happened maybe 3 or 4 times where I actually got the timing worked out where I got to watch the hockey game.
and then you have that for 6 months, that development of the technology that has been such that's a game changer, right?
It is. It absolutely is, because you still feel like you're a part of the family. You get to participate with them, and you're getting to see it, and you're getting to be excited with them, as you can see when these things happen. Sure.
So that was fantastic, being able to, I never thought we'd get an ice hockey game, because Mike is actually the coach of his son's team. So, you know, I felt it was, and we all agreed that it was important to make the connection between them floating around the earth and the wives and families at home and what it's like, you know, to have somebody so far away for 6 months at a time.
Can I dig in a bit? I mean, maybe bringing all three of you in about this question of access, because access is always the key to a great story. But with somebody like NASA, it's such a huge enterprise. Does everything have to run according, you know, how much can you kind of ask them to do for you, and how much are you just kind of, you know, on the very, very fringes of what they're doing?
It's like sometimes it was 3 steps forward and 4 backwards. You know, you go backwards some days and nudge forward other days. There are certain things that were easy for them to do and certain things that weren't easy for them to do. So we all started off thinking, oh great, it's going to pass over the UK and we'll be able to film over London all the time because they can just move the space station. That's naivety, but that's what you think, because it's you know, they must be able to move the space station, but they can't. They can move it up and down to avoid debris, but they can't move it from side to side. And so we couldn't influence the date of the transmission. The date was the date we were given, and that had to coincide with an American broadcast that we were doing for the same people, for National Geographic Channel that went out 2 days earlier. And so there were some immovable things, and then within that there were things that you could negotiate on and make little headway. And if you found that you couldn't do it through one set of contacts, you could try another set of contacts. But I have to say, in all of this, Sally was the master of the NASA relationship and spoke. I mean, at the end of it, it's all trust at the end of the day, isn't it?
Well, the thing I would say, if there's one thing I wish I'd known at the start of this, having never made a space programme before, is what a bugger the archive is at NASA. Because I, you know, innocently thought, marvellous, virtually all the stuff's coming from one source, easy, get it across. Absolutely not. That was a nightmare, and it took months and months and months, because a lot of it isn't logged. If you say you want some of a spacewalk could have 30 hours worth of material, so then you have to try and say, well, which bit of that spacewalk? Then it has to be loaded up and sent over. It was just a complete nightmare. So, you know, anybody doing something with NASA, the archive is a huge issue.
Well, my vibe with NASA is that it's, when you go there, the thing that really strikes you is how old and crumbling it seems. Basically, it was built in the 60s and then revamped in the Reagan era of the 80s. But basically, the lifts, the carpets, the whole vibe of it is kind of, you know, it's a bit like BBC Television Centre sort of thing. It's really, can't believe that they're sending people into space from this kind of, you know, the technology of it looks like, you know what I mean? My iPhone has more technology than Mission Control, the 60s version where they sent them to the moon. But dealing with them, they're amazing. I mean, it's unbelievably impressive. They are the right stuff. You have this sense of these people who could be millionaires in Silicon Valley, but they're working for NASA because they believe in it. And so it's kind of like our relationship in terms of the access was kind of like, to me it was like dealing with a very handsome old man who used to be powerful, who was quite flattered by our interest, but was kind of slightly curmudgeonly at times. And they were kind of like, you know, they were a bit distrustful of us, and we'd always be asking for more, and they couldn't understand why we didn't run it like a military operation and why it was such a kind of ramshackle chaos that we brought with us. But then, as they began to see what we were doing, I think they began to warm up, and by the end, as always, all documentary makers know, the people you get access to at the end hopefully love you at the end of it. But I think they began to, as we were making the programs, they began to see that we were getting something in the footage that they wouldn't normally have. And there's an interesting thing, when you go to Houston, stay in the NASA Hilton Hotel, there's a channel which is just NASA TV, and it's just, they just pump out this kind of gold, but they don't realize it's gold sort of thing, if you sort of mean. It's a bit like going somewhere in Russia where they make caviar, and they just bump, there's another huge bowl of it. But they don't almost realize what they've got. So kind of, it took us to kind of go in there and say, no, you don't understand, it's fucking incredible. So for example, there's a bit where we go, how do they get their food up there? You go, oh, well, we send up a supply rocket. And it's like, what? The groceries come by rocket, and they dock the groceries. And so we're like, okay, well, can we film that? You know what I mean? And then that's a good clip. Can we show that? Because it's kind of like, this clip, I kind of realised that, you know, I think I was beginning to realise how special it was.
And it's time to get our hands on all the goodies inside.
This is special cargo from ground folks. This is some stuff that our wives may contribute to, and some of our friends who work for Orbital and other folks. So this is a little bit of a special gift. So we're opening it here for the first time. We're pretty excited about it.
Yeah, we have no idea what's inside.
But we're hoping that we'll see. Oh, wow.
And they were so thrilled because this is what they normally eat. I've got some samples here. Freeze-dried food, because it costs $10,000 for every pound in weight to get it up to the space station. So they freeze-dry it so that 97% of the moisture is gone, and then they just squirt some water in there and mix it up a bit, and it swells out and they eat it. But of course they can't put it on a plate. So you have to have your veg in one pack. That's cream spinach. This is spaghetti and meat sauce. So they just have to eat from each little packet, otherwise it would all float away. But I think, so the archive was, I mean, it wasn't that they were difficult, but they just did not have it logged in a way that I thought NASA would.
Leave the archive, all right.
Yes, I'll leave the archive, but so that was a big issue for anyone else in this situation. But then the building of trust was really important, because you know, one guy that had a lot of dealings with, the lead flight director, you know, he sort of said, if you screw me over, you know, I will come down on you like a ton of bricks. And he meant it.
Is this Royce?
It was Royce.
Yeah, Royce. Yeah, so, you know, they'd never done anything like this before. They were used to little broadcasts with schools or a news piece, very much controlled, and what we were asking for, more and more and more, was huge for them. But the reason they were very keen to help was because of the science. They were very keen that we showed the amount of science experiments that are done up there, because, as I was saying earlier, most people don't even know the space station's up there, let alone what it was doing. So that was a sort of negotiation of which stories we could include, which would be interesting. And as time went on, the trust grew, you know, we met our deadlines with them, and we were both on a huge learning curve. You know, we'd never done it, nothing like this had been done before, NASA hadn't done it before, so we were on a journey together. And I'm pleased to say that at the end of it all, they were really thrilled by what came out of it.
But there were some nervous moments along the way. 2 days,
Yes.
2 days before the live show aired, they said, we took them way outside of their comfort zone, and one of the shows we made was Houston, we have a problem. And NASA don't want to recognise any problems. They don't have problems. They have contingency after contingency after contingency, so they have no problems. And for them to allow us to make that programme and to take part in it was really, really groundbreaking for them. And we showed them the cut, because we have to check it for factual accuracy. And one of the bits of commentary they were unhappy with, and they said that, and it was really close to transmission, it was the day of transmission, and we want to be factually accurate, and so we changed it. But one of the messages, the clear messages, was that if that doesn't get changed, you won't be doing the live show on the Sunday. You know, and that's because they want to be accurate, and they want to I suppose, respect the great work that they're doing, and so it was changed and it wasn't a problem. But sometimes it was a knife edge. No,
Who did you have in your team in terms of winning that trust? Did you have to kind of skill up with? But you said, you know, you'd forgotten about space yourself, Sally. I mean, what kinds of skills did you have in your own team?
I'm old, in a way. I was able to say, look, you know, I've been all these years in television, I've never screwed anyone over. You know, this guy had a difficult call, and I said, you know, that's not my way, and you know, I want you to feel that this has all been worthwhile. So I suppose I've got years of experience in that way, but obviously, you know, one of the APs, Sarah, is an astrophysicist. We had 2 science researchers. We had to have people on the team who knew about that stuff so that we could get to the crux of the science stories. And also the route was a complete nightmare, because, you know, loss of signal, day-night, cloud. 70% of the Earth is covered in cloud, half the time in an orbit it's dark. So Sarah Barker, the assistant producer, worked hugely with NASA, plotting about our route, and you know, we knew about a month before what the route would be, but then there were adjustments.
This all sounds rather glamorous, but Sally had an inflatable beach ball model of the Earth, literally, and I was talked through the route, and she'd go, right, I've got a photo of you somewhere with this beach ball Earth going around. It's like the final preparations for our lap of the planet. I mean, you know what I mean?
Yes.
That was kind of that's how we roll, isn't it? You know what I mean?
Yes,
I imagine it being like a 3D hologram like in Star Wars, but no, it's beautiful.
An interesting thing happened with the transmission, because we were meant to be on 8 till 10, and then when we got the route, we realised that at 8 o'clock we would be in daylight over South America, but then 10 minutes later we'd go into 45 minutes of darkness, whereas if we went on air at 7:30, we'd be on the west coast of California. So you know, we said, could we do 7:30 to 9:30? But Channel 4 said, no, could you do 7:30 to 10? So it became a 2.5-hour show.
So in an industry in which scheduling is king, I mean, how do you have those conversations with a scheduler? I mean, how do you win a battle between a Channel 4 scheduler and NASA?
Exactly. I mean, seriously, that's my life.
What would Channel 4 say? No, we can't do. What program would Channel 4 not show a live
between a
broadcast?
rock and a hard place. You have to try and explain to them, listen, this is fucking NASA we're fucking with here. You know, you can't change the day.
They're your precise words.
Pretty much. And basically, no, they are actually, in the sense that basically we found out that it was up against, I can't remember what it was up against, it was up against the Top Gear special, and it was up against Prince Harry, it was all that. So they're going like a few days before, can we just ask the space station to hang on? And no, we can't. So basically, yeah, no, it is exactly, that was quite a, it was quite locked in, all that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, ultimately Channel 4 schedulers bowed to NASA's greater force.
But what was great about starting at 7:30 was we were told, reliably informed by NASA, we would be right over San Francisco. And so we had these visions of starting the show and zooming right into the Golden Gate Bridge, and that was just going to be the way that it was going to be. And then, was it a few hours or a day before?
Yes.
NASA suddenly said, oh, actually, we're not going to be over San Francisco. We're going to be right down south over San Diego, and that's why we started on Baja, California. But yeah, it was those things. I suppose you can't worry about the things that you can't change, because there are so many other things to worry about that you can sort of influence a little bit. And it was like that all the way through. There were so many things where we didn't know the signal sort of like would go every 20 minutes, and then we found out literally the day before that we wouldn't have signal until 8 seconds before going on air. And then NASA said, we can always predict when the signal goes, we just can't predict when it's going to come back, but we think it'll be 8 seconds.
2 minutes either way.
Yeah.
So you know, but it was just the most thrilling programme or series of programmes I've ever done. And you know, a gem that did come out of the archive, when I said, oh, these are the things we want, I said, but obviously I can't ask for what I don't know is there. So what would you recommend? And they said, oh, well, actually, when 9/11 happened, one of the astronauts, there was just one American astronaut on board, and he played taps on the trumpet, you know, the last post. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And this is such a powerful, we haven't got it here unfortunately, it's such a powerful film. And really this is an example of truth being more incredible than fiction. Because if you had written a drama where you have an astronaut, one American astronaut on the ISS, 9/11, he goes over New York, he sees smoke, he doesn't know what's happening, calls in, they say, we're having a bad day on Earth. And then it turns out, as he goes round, he films it and he sees the smoke. A few days later, he finds out that he knows the pilot of the plane that crashed at the Pentagon. They were in the drum and bugle corps together. And then, if that's not enough, he happens to have a trumpet on board the space station, and he does a message to all his classmates on Earth, and he plays the trumpet. Now, in a drama, you would say, come on, that is ridiculous. And that's what happens. So, you know, there were unexpected gems all the way. Working with astronauts, they are extraordinary people. And you just see how being an astronaut or being a flight director changes people's lives. Flight directors are always looking for the worst case scenario. I said, you know, if you were watching a launch now, what would you be thinking? Is it going to blow up? They said, even if my best friend's on there, what's my job? I said, how does it affect you in normal life? She said, well, at the church, somebody might be having a meeting, and I say, well, what if so-and-so happens? And they said, well, why would that happen? She said, I'm a flight director, I always look at the worst. So it's amazing how they just absorb everything to do with NASA, and they all work as a team to try and, you know, strive to explore and you know, do incredible things, really. So it was a really exciting project to work on.
So we've talked about the kind of challenges of you know, Channel 4, Arrow, working with NASA. There's another partnership, which is the fact that there are Russians as well. They're the cosmonauts on board the ISS at the same time, and you're also trying to have to negotiate with NASA and the Russian space agency as well.
Yeah, there were 3 people on board the space station. You make, and so two NASA people, although one was JAXA, but it comes under the NASA group, and a cosmonaut. Now, you may call them cosmonauts, we call them cameramen. And you know, we were reliant on this cameraman, Mika, to film what was going on. And this became a very, very big issue, because at a kind of like a man-to-man level, person-to-person level, the astronauts talked to the cosmonauts, and Mikhail was really happy to do it. And he, of course, I'll do it, not a problem. That was the signal we got back down from the space station. But it has to happen at a senior level, and it couldn't just happen at the astronaut level. It couldn't happen at the flight director. It went up to the head of the International Space Station program, who had to ask his equivalent in Star City, just outside Moscow, whether Mikhail would be allowed to do it. And we found out about a week beforehand. It wasn't so far away from transmission, and that was a huge relief. And then I just say that so we had the first live show for Nat Geo was on the Friday. On the Wednesday, I think it was, we had the dress rehearsal. How bizarre to have a dress rehearsal with the space station. So we had a 2-hour window in the gallery, everyone there, and all of a sudden Misha's there as the cameraman, and Rick and Koichi are there. We can communicate with them and have a fantastic conversation with them, and dress rehearse where they're going to be, and block through the whole show. And that was an amazing moment, and that's where we realised that Misha had a really important contribution to make to the whole process.
Generally,
well.
the cosmonauts, I love the cosmonauts. Yeah. And the cosmonauts are a different kind of animal from the astronauts, as far as I can tell. So whereas the Americans are basically always doing exercise and kind of push-ups and lifting weights and monitoring every calorie they put in their body, the cosmonauts don't give a monkeys, and they're just basically having fun. And they're much less PR'd. So whereas basically the astronauts generally, you have a sense that they're not going to say anything difficult. The cosmonauts simply don't care, it seems. Also, the other thing that was interesting was that Ukraine was just kicking off, basically, as we were doing that. So there was this kind of sense in which that kind of, on the Earth, the countries are, looking at, bubbling towards a war. And up in space, they're mates and they're hanging out. But there's a beautiful little scene in one of the documentaries where we didn't really have access to film the cosmonauts, but on Thanksgiving dinner, they meet up with the cosmonauts. And you just get a tiny glimpse of the cosmonauts being a little less PR'd than the astronauts.
I think we've got that clip now.
Thanksgiving, November 28th. Big day for us Americans. We've invited the Russians over to join our celebration day. It's not hard to find. There's a nice river or lake right next to his house. It's a very interesting lake. Yeah. No, we can't see it. No, actually, you see white somebody's house. Yeah, some dirt. Right at the huge amount of salt is crazy place. And nothing else. The most important in Africa is
I love that. Jay Hunt, who's head of Channel 4, she's Australian. She didn't like that clip. She thought I'd put that in just to wind her up. But basically, this idea that Australia, most boring territory on Earth, it's just so Russian to not give a fuck and just tell it like it is. So it was kind of, they were joyous. But also, they had a kind of profound level as well. During the live lap of the planet, Misha was asked, what do you learn from being up there? And he's like, you don't see any boundaries from up here. And he said it much better than I can. But this sort of idea that you don't, so it's all one planet. It's kind of
whole Earth.
Yeah, and all that sort of stuff, and you kind of got the sense that they're on a profound level. There's also, I don't know if it's ever true, I don't, some facts are too good to check, but there was a thing that you told me once, or someone told me, that the Americans would want to give themselves vitamin injections, and the best way of giving themselves vitamin injections would be to have pure alcohol to make it hygienic or whatever. But they're not allowed to take pure alcohol up there onto the space station in case the cosmonauts drink it. So the Americans have to use weird gels, which they resent, because the cosmonauts might have it away with it.
Even though they're on the same place, the Russians eat their food out of tins, and so the Americans they have different quarters and different things, but they come together for certain experiments.
Also, it's interesting that the astronauts, they're all old. The astronauts are all kind of in their 50s or 60s, but they look 40. Whereas the cosmonauts are all in their 50s or 60s, but they look 70. And they all look pretty much the same as far as I can see. Well, that's a young cosmonaut. But I love the cosmonauts. They were an interesting bonus level for us.
You talked about the perspective that the astronauts have. There's a remarkable piece of footage which we haven't got about the Aral Sea and about how over time the ISS is documenting what's happening to the Earth. So was that how important was it for you to get those kinds of environmental stories in there as well?
Oh yeah, no, hugely. I mean, it's kind of it was weird almost making this series because we were like kids in a sweet shop. There was so much you could do. So many unbelievable stories, but one of the key ones is an environmental one, which just in the last 10 years, they've basically these images from the space station. I mean, they say that, when the human race went to the moon, what they discovered was this looking back on the planet Earth. I mean, Al Gore's big on this, that the environmental movement almost started with the first image back on the Earth. And we've only had since, like, whatever it is, the 60s or 70s, whatever, that image. And since then, the Earth has changed unbelievably profoundly. And it's kind of weird. It's one of the things we're thinking about doing next with them. But there's a kind of way in which, maybe you're not going to hear it from anyone else. You're not going to listen to Al Gore or scientists or whatever. But astronauts who literally have physically seen with it, Chris Hadfield says, when I first flew, there was an Aral Sea. Now it's gone. Fourth biggest sea on Earth, and it's whatever it is, and it's just, man has dried it up deliberately. And it's just kind of, you see also the Cairo, as one of the astronauts talks about, the lights at Cairo. You see 2002, as recently as 2002, and there's just a few lights with Cairo. 2012, bang, it's just lit up. And it's just, you just see that the Earth is changing at this exponential rate, and getting their perspective on it is quite profound and amazing. And a lot of the astronauts come back with a sense of the preciousness of just how fragile the Earth's atmosphere is. And if you look at it like that, it's kind of, some of them are religious, and some of them say that, that their heaven experience is, that maybe Earth is the closest thing to heaven we have. I'm rambling on. One of the favourite stories in the whole thing, there's a brilliant astronaut called Mike Massimino who fixed the Hubble telescope, and we do that story, and it's an incredible story about, he's like an Italian-American, he's a real lovely guy, and he's fixing the Hubble telescope, and it all looks like it's going to go wrong. Finally he fixes the Hubble telescope, and it's an amazing life experience thing, and means the human race can look into far-off galaxies and from the past and birth of the universe stuff. And he did it with a wrench, And but there's a reward. NASA say, hey, Mike, why don't you just enjoy the view? Something they never do because spacewalks are so dangerous. So he's just there floating in his umbilical cord, and he just watches the Earth spin beneath him. And he has this kind of profound experience that sort of, people talk about going up to the heavens, but it's actually the Earth that's the special bit of the universe. And, we don't know if there are other places that can support life, but Earth from there, if everything else feels very, very desert, and suddenly you see this beautiful, glowing blue,
We have a montage clip of the lap, so should we cue that up now?
Yeah, that's kind of what it's really about, this program, as well as other things.
You've been in the air roughly about 104 minutes, which is almost the time it takes the Earth to complete the lap of the world, and that's what we have done.
Awesome. Mark, I want to move on now to talk about what we did, what Channel 4 did online, what you guys all did about the project. Where do you start creating an interactive experience around something that's just so visually spectacular?
Yeah, so we had a number of challenges, and one of them was that I think space, well, we knew from research that people thought space was American, and what could we do to sort of make it feel a bit more British? Also, we found out that people were interested in us lifting the lid on astronauts, and so you did that in the TV, but we could also do it online. And one of the ways is to show people that you have some of the qualities astronauts have, because it's not true, we discovered, that you have to be a Marine to be an astronaut. Sometimes they go in to fix the toilets, and they need people who can fix things, who've got really practical skills, or who can fix computers.
Need plumbers.
Sorry?
They need plumbers.
They need plumbers. Yeah, exactly, because you're up there for 6 months, and you can't, if something goes wrong, you have to fix it. So we wanted to sort of make that come across, and so we had a kind of an astronaut test, because we knew people like to do tests, they're sort of simple online tests that are quick to fill out. But it was all based on the selection criteria for the European Space Agency. And it was introduced by an English astronaut who's now currently in training to go up to the International Space Station. So that way we could make it feel a bit more British, but we could also make it feel a bit more live if we could make it interactive as well. So how more live can it feel if you at home can interact with the astronauts up there? At least that's what we thought. And so we thought, wow, because you can Skype with them, right? That's fantastic, and they tweet. So we thought we could be in direct communication with the astronauts, but you can't, because we constantly kept finding the limitations of dealing not just with NASA, but just technically. There were lots and lots of challenges.
Maybe bring in Nick and Annabel on this now. I mean, Nick, this isn't just building a website around a TV show. This is working with NASA. What does it feel like to be doing that?
Well, we kind of came along with lots and lots of ideas, and it was almost along the lines of what we had with the TV, where we thought this would be really cool to do it, and then found out that actually there's really good technical reasons why that wasn't possible to do. So we kind of started off with the kind of biggest ideas and brought them.
Just give us an example. What were the ideas that you can get away?
Well, initially we'd started off. We wanted to have things like live HD streaming from the view of the Earth for a couple of weeks beforehand, so people could get to see it. But it turns out at that point there wasn't any HD cameras on the outside. They weren't flown up until
the HD cameras were supposed to be there, and then they were delayed.
Yeah,
It was a whole series of yes, you can do it, no, you can't. Yes, you can do live questions, no, you can't, because it only needed one person in that chain of saying no, and then it wouldn't happen.
We wanted to do things that would bring the audience really closer together with the astronauts up there, because when it's flying over the UK, you're kind of only 200-300 miles up. It's you're very physically close to it. So we thought, how can we get people closer together in that physical way? And we had lots of ideas around beaming messages up and beaming down and so on while it's flying over. But then, as well as the technical uncertainty, there's a lot of uncertainty, like, was it going to be flying over the UK at the point where, as we now know, it wasn't. So we had to be very kind of playing it very safe in terms of what we could do, because if we'd done those two ideas, we'd have ended up coming to launch and there'd been no pictures and it wouldn't have been flying over. So we had to work within a whole lot of restrictions, technically, and in terms of building something that we could build very quickly. The biggest challenge that we had in it was the timescales, because we kind of only pitched and briefed it in about November, which meant there's a few weeks of deciding what to do. So we only actually had 7 weeks to design, code, build, and test it and launch it. So within that time frame as well, we had to figure out what was feasible to do in the time we had, because if we had a year, we could do something.
So I think, Annabel, I'd like to talk about social media in a second. I think we've got a clip of one of the things you did, which was the interactive game, and we have Jon Snow playing one of the games. Is this a game that the astronauts actually invented themselves on board the ISS?
No, so this was something that we originally pitched. This was one of the ideas that was feasible to make, which was we had the idea that on the assumption that the astronauts are, they're the 1 in a billion people, they're the physical peak, the mental peak. So we thought, could we pitch the people of Earth playing a game against the astronauts? So we wanted to conceive a game that people could play on the computers, get a score, but then the astronauts could recreate in space and play actually in zero gravity.
So I know there's some game designers in the audience. You've actually invented a game, Nick, that's been played in space.
Exactly, yeah. So
it's just not going to get better in your career after that, is it?
So there was lots of really tough things around that, about working out, what equipment they had aboard that we could play the games with, because we couldn't send stuff up, what the physics was, what the practicalities of doing it, the time for them to actually create the game and do it. There was a
And
whole
do they not have, like, they don't have like a box of Jenga hanging around up there or something like that you can kind of borrow?
I don't believe so. If they had, it would have been really helpful. But they...
Okay, can we run the clip of the interactive game? Clip number...
So here we are. The tournament is going to be three teams. Mike and Queasy and I will play against each other in our kind of round-robin thing. And we're going to take 3 shots each. A clean pass through the hoop is worth 2 points. If it hits the hoop, it goes through, it's worth 1 point. If it doesn't go through, it's worth 0. All right. 3, 2, 1, go! Whoa! Whoa! You got it.
Have I cracked it? Wow. Oh no, the thing is spinning. That means the minute I went, oh. Oh! It's impossible to think you're much better than you are. No. Easy. Oh, come on, Matt. The machine cheated on me. Can you do it? 50 points, hooray! I'm right at the space. No question.
Is that going to be the sequel, Jon Snow in space? That would be a great show. Annabel, I'd love to talk. You got an incredible reaction on social media. So, I mean, how much did you work to develop that, and how much of it was just organic because of the sheer spectacle of the event?
We did quite a lot of strategy around the actual social media because basically what was really good about the project is Channel 4 wanted to do space differently, and so we launched the actual marketing promo that was launched during the Brit Awards, and so on social media we wanted to celebrate that in quite a big way and actually start the conversation around space. We knew that there was going to be loads of questions because people kind of have the kind of ideas like, how do you cry in space, what is it like to sleep in space, and so we realised also that we needed to get access to astronauts to kind of sit in with the multi-platform team and kind of answer those types of Q&As. So we tended to have like questions from like adults that really had things that they really wanted to know, through to parents who were with their children asking like, my 7-year-old is next to me, I want to know this. So social media was really quite key. What was key about it as well is to draw people back to the website, because we had a number of different features. We had the game that obviously we wanted to push, and we got celebrities to play it. We also had an exploratory kind of immersive documentary which was made up of an interview that the production team had done with Chris Hadfield. We had the test, and then we also had another kind of feature on the site as well. So yeah.
Which was?
I can't remember. Sorry, I'm kind of being...
Did you end up doing My Face in Space?
Yeah, Your Face in Space, yeah. So we had like an opportunity for people to kind of get their questions answered by the astronauts up in the ISS. And so, yeah.
And what kind of a response did you get from that? I mean, how many people wanted to see the Space in Space?
We got around probably 1,000 responses, so it wasn't probably the biggest success on that scale, but in terms of the actual reaction on the night, we kind of had, I think, around 80 million impressions on Twitter for the hashtag and stuff. So people were kind of really keen to kind of talk about the project.
So that's how we got around those restrictions. So the way we had to do it was actually quite time-consuming. So because we couldn't get that direct communication, we had to go and film people, and then that had to get sent to NASA, and they go from NASA's computer to the computer up on the ISS, and they've got this ferocious firewall, and that's the reason why. And then from that computer onto an iPad that was then floating in space, and then the question could be asked. But we did that, and it nonetheless made it feel like it was quite a direct communication. It was really quite a nice thing to do. On the night, we had 2 astronauts in our OB van, and one of them was fielding questions that were coming in live on Twitter that were then sent to to the presenter to ask directly of the astronauts.
Yeah,
and another astronaut was also just tweeting directly from there. So, for instance, when the Russian guy was saying the amazing thing about being up in space is there are no borders, and he was tweeting a picture of Crimea that he had taken, things like that from the ISS.
Wow, amazing.
I mean, there was one thing that I messed up was that the online support was unbelievable on this project. You should see the website, it's still up there now. It's unbelievably good. And yet, basically, we didn't throw to it enough because basically, when we're in the truck and, we're losing the signal and all that stuff and electrical storms and all that, I also have Mark and Annabel on my shoulder saying, don't forget to mention the website. I'm like, yeah. We'll mention the website. Don't worry, we'll mention the website. But we never did mention the website enough, and it's criminal, really, because the website was unbelievably good. And even so, it still did very well. But it's just like I should have done. And it's just one of those things you always, in a way, put online kind of to the bottom of, or the last thing that you do for some reason in TV. And it was just I feel guilty about it to this day.
That was one of those huge learning curves. That when we did it on the Sunday, every time we put the website up, it went ballistic, didn't it, on the website?
Yeah, every mention, it's just obvious. I mean, it seems a bit obvious, but every mention, there's a massive spike in people going directly to the web.
You talked about presenters. We're going to open it up to questions in a second, so start getting questions ready if you want to ask some questions to this team. We've not mentioned Dermot.
Oh, he's amazing.
I mean, there are very, very few people that can handle live TV.
Honestly,
Nobody's done live TV from space before. How did Dermot get involved? And he did a fantastic job.
Well, he's just unbelievable. It's really interesting. It's one of those things. One of the things I learned on this project as well was that just respect for live TV presenters. I mean, there are equivalent of astronauts, really, and. Unbelievable, basically, to kind of, that we were, as I was saying, the behind the scenes was quite crazy. And, the night before, we had different versions of the script. The astronauts are working to one version of the script. There's the Nat Geo script, there's our script, there's the changes to the script, there's changes I'm making to the script, there's Jay's changes to the thing I'm changing to the da-da-da. And it was complete madness, basically. And Dermot's basically stayed up till 1, 2 in the morning just downloading the script into his head. And I was worried he was going to be exhausted on the day because he'd been up all night basically learning the script. But he basically got the 2.5 hours in his head. And from then on he was like, okay, I can handle this. Whatever you throw at me, I can handle it. And it's just unbelievable to have us in the ear, you know what I mean, to be kind of dealing with losing satellite link-ups, to be affable, to be kind of getting the best performance out of the astronauts he's talking to take in all this information and ask the right questions. I mean, the guy is like an unbelievable pro. It's like kind of watching a great athlete close up or something like that. It's unbelievable what a skill it is, and it's probably rarer than astronauts to find people that can really, really do it. And it's just sort of, it's interesting because it looks effortless. So no one I've been in TV all this time. I never really appreciated it until seeing him in action.
He looked like he was having the time of his life.
Well, he loved it. I mean, but he was kind of properly amazing.
Did he come to you guys? I mean, obviously
no,
it's
we chose him.
It's all,
how enthusiastic?
But it was,
what a job.
It was always Dermot from day one
Yeah.
that we wanted to present the show, and he was up for it from day one as well. It was a very, very easy thing to get him to do. And the other thing that's worth mentioning, the other person that's worth mentioning, I know we mentioned him a little bit, but the co-presenter was Mike Massimino.
Yeah.
And there was that fantastic, Dermot went out of his way to bond with Mike. That's easy to do because he's a really, really nice guy, Mike Massimino. But they hit it off, and there was fantastic chemistry between them. And Dermot knew that wherever he was in the show, if we lost a link, if something went wrong, there was Mike to turn to and they could have a conversation about it.
Great.
And it was sort of like our get out of jail card, but it worked brilliantly.
Yeah,
Because
excellent.
Dermot was with us for a week and a day, which was fantastic. The first show was on the Wednesday and he came out on the Sunday and really threw himself into it, as they got to know Mike. And he just struck, I think, a really nice balance between being excited but not sort of saying, oh, it's amazing, they've let me, little old Dermot, into mission control. It was like he was a bit grown up, he had a right to be there, but he was still thrilled, and I hope that came.
Yeah, we were trying to say not to sell it. In a way, I think the X Factor, he's like the compere of it, and he has to sell it. He goes, they sell everything to you. They Beyonce knows, you know what I mean, or whatever it is. Whereas we're just saying, you've got it here. You know what I mean? We've got the most amazing stuff with ingredients in the world. Just be cool and kind of calm about it. He was pitch perfect.
He played it
I
more
feel
like his
embarrassed
radio show.
to sound like I'm sucking up to him, but I promise you, I was really I was really impressed. It was kind of, it's hard not to sound when you're saying to him afterwards, it sounds like you're sycophantic, you're just trying to, but I was really genuinely impressed with him. The guy is unbelievable.
Yeah, no, it was fantastic. Okay, we've got about 30 minutes left, so we'll throw out to some questions from the audience. Who wants to start? We have somebody down the front. Do put your hand up and wait for the mics, because we're going to be bringing the mics around so everyone can hear.
Let's ask some questions.
Hi there. I just wanted to find out who watched it. I saw the overnights, which were pretty good, so I just wanted to find out if you knew anything about the demographic, how old, male, female, who was interested in a show like this, and also what being live did, and more generally, what sort of audience does a live show bring? Is there any trend in that for Channel 4?
I should really know the answer to all those questions, and I know none of them. No, I do. I can give you a bit of a guess, if you like. I think that basically, I think it was. To be honest, I don't know. I think that basically the audience was good. It basically was pretty young and ABC One, which is what Channel 4 advertisers want. Now, I want to rant about something else connected to it, yeah? Which is that people think they care about ratings, yeah? But what I've learned is ratings don't really matter. It's really interesting, this. I'll just rant at you for a second. Basically, everyone's obsessed with ratings, but they're not really interested in ratings. People are only interested in their own ratings rather than someone else's ratings. Do you see what I mean? It's like someone's holiday photos. Your own holiday photos are quite interesting, especially if you're in them. But if someone else's holiday photos are incredibly boring. It's the same with ratings. That people are obsessed with their own ratings, but no one ever notices anyone else's ratings. They're too dull to be interested in other people's ratings. And then it turns out that in terms of selling advertising for Channel 4, the BBC, you can't advertise on the BBC. So we were only competing with, ITV, Channel 5, Sky. Do you see what I mean? And then, basically, Channel 5 and ITV are kind of down-market, kind of massive quantities. So if you want to sell baked beans and bog roll, you sell it during Britain's Got Talent. Do you know what I mean? But if you want to sell Audis and Grolsch, you have to go to Channel 4. Do you see what I'm saying? So kind of actually, it doesn't necessarily matter how many people are watching, necessarily, in terms of how much the advertising space is worth. Do you see what I mean? So the more you dig into ratings, the more, the kind of demographics that you're talking about do start to matter. So Channel 4 still does very, very well in terms of youngs and ABC One, which is what the advertisers want. And weirdly, they don't want them both at the same time, because you either sell the slots young or you sell the slots ABC One, but you're almost wasting ABC One viewers if you're, do you see what I mean? So basically, at this point, I began to glaze over when they got onto exactly the question you asked. But basically, that's the vibe of it. That sort of, I think that Life in Space had a huge reach. I know that. It had a reach of about 12 million viewers. So 12 million people watched some bit of the offering of the season. And I think it was pretty upmarket and ABC One. But I mean, to be honest, I don't really look at the demographics, because I kind of think you've got to just try and aspire to do great stuff. Do you know what I mean? Let's let the advertisers worry about that stuff. And let's just try and do something amazing. And then if they come, they come, and often they don't. I've pretty much given up on the British public to some extent. They basically they've always turned their nose up at my stuff. You know what I mean? It's very, very rare that we have massive hits, even though we're constantly offering them beautiful, beautiful programs. But this particular project was a win all the way around, because it was watched by huge numbers, for Channel 4, and it was just a fantastic show.
What was surprising, though, that on the live show, there was another 600,000 people who watched it over the next 7 days, who probably watched Top Gear instead or something like that. But you'd have thought if they didn't catch it live, they'd lose interest. But no, that's a huge number, much higher than normal. Watched it on. Can
I pick up on that bit, because it seems that we're going through a new era of liveness in a time when people are starting to watch drama, and particularly in a kind of binge view, post-schedule way. Are we seeing the broadcast schedule kind of fracturing around genres? So, I mean, it seems to be that's factual big live events. Channel 4 have done many in the past. You've done Easter Eggs Live, you've done Foxes Live, you've done Hippo Wild Feast. There's been a whole series of kind of reinventing specialist factual genre through live broadcasting. Is that a very specific thing you guys are looking for in Channel 4?
Yes. I mean, yeah, I think that sense of event is really, it's exciting. I mean, there's so much to say about that, and I'll stop ranting at you all, but essentially, I think there is something about modern TV that you want to have a sense of communal event, and people on Twitter going, oh my God, this is incredible, did you see what's going on that channel now? And when you can watch anything at any time, that sort of sense of event becomes more important. And factual events are a rather interesting thing to do, like this one as being the ultimate example. But there's a weird kind of way in which when do you go live and when do you don't go live, you know what I mean? And we've made some kind of slightly, not my department, but say bedtime live was less of a hit. And there's a kind of sense in which a bit like they say about drama, that you should only do drama when documentary can't reach it. So say The West Wing or The Sopranos, you can't make documentary about a Tony Soprano character bumping off his family members. So you can't make documentary about that, so you make a drama about it. And there's some similar rule, I think, about live, that with live you need a certain degree of, you only get it when it's live.
Do you need jeopardy? Is that it? Do you need that risk?
Well, I don't think this had jeopardy for us, but I'm not sure for the viewer it had jeopardy. But I think for the viewer it had a sort of immediacy, which was literally you're looking down on your planet live, and this 94 minutes to go round the planet meant that there was a sort of live event. You kind of feel, I haven't seen that before. I've never flown round the Earth in that time and that live. And I think programs work not live, but they have an extra free source, a genuine free source of doing that live. But it's quite hard to find live events in factual that have that free source. And the risk is sometimes we just slap live on the end, and it doesn't necessarily help. In fact, sometimes it makes it worse.
Okay.
But no, I love a live event.
Any more questions from the audience here? Yeah. Just wait for the mic for a second.
Thanks. Did you say you made it for Nat Geo as well?
Yes.
The lap of the planet?
Yes.
So how did that work in terms of, you did it 2 days before, was it a different presenter?
Yeah, it was a completely different show. It went through many different formats before we settled on it. At one stage it was going to be like a matinee for the Americans, because they're 5 hours behind us. So actually it would have been the matinee, we'd have had the UK show first as a matinee, and then the Nat Geo one after that. And there are many reasons why we had an American broadcaster, one of which, the most important, as far as NASA were concerned, is they needed to, NASA's an American organisation at the end of the day, and they needed to show that they were doing something for an American audience. And then Nat Geo has a great reputation as being an upstanding and upright channel over there, and so it was a very good bond between the two of them. And then Nat Geo decided they wanted to go out on the Friday night, and Channel 4 wanted to go out on the Sunday night. So we sort of like treated the Channel 4 show as the dress rehearsal, I think, or the Nat Geo show as the dress rehearsal for the Channel 4. But they wanted a completely different show. They had a 2-hour show. They had an American. They wanted to choose their presenter or host, and they had an American newsreader, Soledad O'Brien, who was fantastic and got in and out of. She was fantastic at what they wanted to do. They got in and out of every act on time, and she went through. She did a good job for the Nat Geo audience, and they got exactly what they wanted, and it trended #1. It wasn't just on Nat Geo in the end. Nat Geo Global took it, so it went at ridiculous times of the day and night, from Japan to Australia to South America. It went out at exactly the same time and trended #1 around the world on Twitter, and broke the Nat Geo server with people going onto their website. So that was unprecedented for them. So it was a good reaction for them.
Tonally, what was different between the two shows?
I think when you've got a presenter like Dermot, you can get into the stories a little bit more, and you can take your time to get into it. With them, once we'd covered something, let's move on and do something else. It was a bit just more like a news bulletin, a very professional news bulletin.
They love facts, and they're not interested in families so much. The wives and so on were less of interest to them than the Channel 4.
Also, I think we would care more about the visuals, and I think we wanted to give this sense of you've seen something you haven't seen before. So there was an interesting thing where we did an early rehearsal a few days before in the cupola, that window that looks like something out of Star Wars where you can look down on the Earth. And the director, a brilliant director guy called Ron, goes, you should make the whole show from here. And he's kind of right. In a way, there's no point in being other bits of the space station. You can float around and see some experiments or whatever. But it's that window on the Earth that's the interesting bit. So we put much more emphasis on looking down on the Earth and just going with the pictures. So what was really, again, the background of the scene. So if I've set the scene about we get the signal just a few seconds before we're on air. The other thing that's really exciting about live TV, and Sally was unbelievably cool at, is we've got all these beautifully crafted VTs. But if the visuals are good, we just dump them. You dump all your VTs. please, and you stay with the images, stay with the images, stay with the images. And so we were kind of killing our babies as we were running with the show. And that also causes knock-on effects of chaos. The teleprompter's got the wrong thing and da-da-da-da. But if you've got gold, you've got magic, you have to go with it. And just it was amazing watching you go with that. So again, I'm just in the seat just hoping it's going to work out. But you guys are calling, dump that, dump that, dump that, stay with the great stuff, stay with the great stuff. And there's this old guy, I've got to tell you about Ron. So the director, basically, so Jay Hunt, Channel 4 asks me, do you have a good director? What's he done before? And I think, oh fuck, just like your question, I should know the answer to that, but I've no idea what he's done before. So just about a day before we're on air, I go to him, what have you done before? You ever directed anything before? He goes, yeah, I've directed some things. I'm like what? And he goes, well, I've done the Olympic opening ceremony, I've done the Oscars twice, I've done oh, okay, great, you sound really good.
We knew he was good.
And so, yeah, you knew that, but I didn't. So anyway, he turned out to be the real McCoy. And we just said, stay with the amazing images. That was my note to him, was basically, that was probably one of the main differences between the Channel 4 and the Nat Geo version, was just saying, Ron, give me the gold when you've got it, you know.
And Ron had made the Luke Wallenda, what's his name? Nick Wallenda Skywalk Live across the canyon. He'd previously done that, where every shot seemed to be like it was from a movie. The big challenge with the Nat Geo show, I have to say, was that they went over the land once and the rest of it was all sea. They went over Hawaii and the rest of it was either nighttime or ocean in daytime. So they had a really unfortunate lap of the planet, which they could
I was gutted, I tell you. I was so sad when I saw their route. I know, it's terrible for them.
Yeah. And was that just down to their scheduling? Was that just
just the luck of the draw, or the lot of, they clung to Hawaii as the only bit of America that they, could call their own.
Let's hope they're not watching us now.
I think one more question, lady there in the fourth row.
Wait for the mic.
Hello, I was wondering if logistically and financially you could do it again, and if so, would you? Because I'd watch it like every week. The novelty would not wear off for me.
That's very nice of you. Tom will be glad to hear you say that. You plant her out.
I think you need
I'd watch it every week, David. Yeah, great.
Checks in the post.
Yes, we are. We're looking at doing it again. Absolutely. We just got to find an offering that's kind of as cool. But yeah, no, absolutely. And what's so nice is now we get on. We're friends with NASA in the sense that, as we were talking about earlier, about the kind of edgy getting to know them. But now they kind of love us and we love them, and it's sort of so. Yeah, we'll be back for more. So yeah, we're going to try and make it an area that we come back to a few times. But
how cool is it to say, yeah, we're friends with NASA? Yeah.
I know. I love saying that. That's really good. Disgusted with NASA. Yeah, they're the right stuff.
Okay, we've got one fun clip. Okay, we'll take one more question quickly. That's okay?
Go on. No.
I was going to do a wrap-up, but that's fine.
No. If you are doing it again, what is the one big lesson that you would take away? Maybe something that you didn't think worked? I'm always quite interested in how people are critical of
that. That was my final question to the panel, so that's very good.
So what do we do? If you do it again, what have you learned?
One thing you've learned or one thing you would do differently?
So we worked with Rocket, who are the kind of digital agency, and they are extremely creative and really want to kind of stir up the audience. And one of the kind of later additions was probably the live tracker, which allowed the audience to kind of watch where the ISS was going. And also there was this really fun gravity on and off switch where when you hit the off on the homepage, everything kind of descends into microgravity. So obviously we had really tight time scales to kind of get the website done, but it's kind of playing to the strengths of the agency that you're working with, and just trying to be as creative as possible for the audience's sake and not necessarily thinking about time.
Cool. Nick, having invented a game that's been played in space, what would you do differently if you did it again?
I think in terms of the game, making more of the fact that it's a game we invented and was played in space, because there was so much going on in the TV show to kind of feature too much of it, and because we didn't know until literally a few days before the TX whether they were going to be able to do it, because they only did it a few days before, didn't they? And so we hadn't really pushed it at all in the messaging around the game that they're going to then do it in space, and it might have been a case where it was better to apologise after than ask permission before, so perhaps we should have been a bit bolder in our messaging.
Cool. Mark, from your perspective?
Yeah, it's along the lines of what David was saying as well. I actually think the multi-platform team need to be with the production team in the script meetings in order to be able to say this is where we need to throw to online, and do calls to action for Twitter, etc.
Great. Sally?
Well, I think I've already said it, that have an archive researcher start on day one.
Just because of the sheer amount of stuff and the
Yeah,
whole
don't
process.
assume because it's from one place it'll be easy to get hold of.
Right. Very good. Tom.
Well, three things that stick in my mind. One, that we would feature the Channel 4 website much more in the shows. That was a huge takeout for me and a huge learning point. And then try to push the content a little bit more. I think how can we push it and be live and do something different? Can we be there when the astronauts are arriving on one of the Soyuz rockets, or do something that pushes that on a little bit more? And the other thing is that NASA are upgrading their broadband. It's almost like a dial-up at the moment. It's very, very. We could only have 3 downlinks, 3 cameras at any one time, and so you had to carefully choose which cameras you use. And I think what we'd really try and do is make use of their broadband, and it's almost like they're going to go full HD up there. And it also means that we can have more interactivity. So I'd love to see live conversations and live tweeting and more live elements like that for people watching at home to interact with the astronauts.
I think they're all being hypercritical, almost taking the questions a second of what did we do wrong. I think what I take from it is sort of, if you aim for doing something unbelievably sublime, you've got a chance of doing something incredible. And I think just the scale of the ambition of what these guys were trying to do is so sublime, and that's why the program is kind of incredible. And sounding cheesy about it, it's kind of, I think it gave a bit of meaning to all of our careers and lives, frankly, when you do something that is sort of doing justice to an organisation like NASA and these astronauts and all this stuff we're talking about the planet and stuff. This is kind of the level of ambition was just way up here. And I kind of think in TV it's often we forget that, and sometimes we don't aim quite high enough. And if you aim to do something really special, you've got a chance like these guys of pulling it off, and they did. And it's kind of it's just an unbelievable thing to watch them do it. And it's sort of I think that's the kind of thing in documentary, your subject matter is the most important thing. It's like a chef's ingredients, and they went for the most sublime kind of fantastical fantasy subject matter. And I kind of think that's the way we should treat TV, is to sort of to just use it, like to think what would be the coolest possible dream that we could do. And it's just sort of when you're involved in it, even as a bit of a kind of from afar, from my point of view, it's unbelievably life affirming and special stuff. Cool.
It's funny, NASA, at the end of it, they said, well, we delivered all the shows, and it was the Sunday night, and they said, there's this little bar we can all go to, and we all went down to this bar, which turned out to be this most amazing place with 200 people from NASA and about 50 people from the production all squeezed in. And Royce Renfrew, who was the lead flight director, and was really the man, the yes or no man in the whole project, and Sally's new best friend, and he stood up afterwards and said, you know what? We may have just inspired the next child who's going to become a NASA astronaut, and that's pretty big, and that's pretty special, and that made it feel really, really worthwhile doing at the end of the day.
Great. I think we have a final montage clips package. Are we okay to run that to go out on a?
This is like the Arrow Media reel.
Huge
Hollywood sell.
Yeah,
this is like.
We'll give them it, David.
Yeah, well, you deserve it. You deserve it.
You deserve it.
It's November 7th, 2:30 a.m. The launch morning. Get ready to suit up, get ready to head out to the launch pad.
Tonight, Dixon and astronauts at the International Space Station. We share the Emirates bus and then
We'll see you on the road.
welcome to astronauts living in space.
I always wanted that from Japan.
I'm Rick Strachey, originally from Connecticut.
I'm Mike Hopkins, also known as Hopkins.
Big excitement today. The groceries are out of their way. There's only one way for them to get here. This is special cargo from ground folks. This is some stuff that our wives may have contributed to, and some of our friends who work for Orbital.
We have no idea what's inside.
Oh, wow. Look at that. Tortillas. Oh, my goodness gracious. Do we use hot dog Bush? It has to be
What is it like to be in space, to exist in space?
It is, I think, the coolest thing people can do. I was not disappointed. It was like, gee, go on over with our, no, it exceeded any expectation.
can you give us
Welcome to the second program of Channel 4 Space Season Live from the floor of Mission Control. It's the most extreme habitat imaginable, and as you'll see tonight, danger is never far away.
Crew safety is number one, and at that point, really the mission objective became secondary.
Get this straight up there, outside the space station, it's the most hostile environment. The water's sticking to your face. How are you feeling?
I have two thoughts at this point. First of all, it's I need to get back, and also I'm trying to think what is it? The water is still falling. Now it covers my eyes, my ears, and it covers my nose. What happens if it reaches my mouth? What if I can't breathe? And I want to drown in space.
Particularly a spacewalk, you're going to just beautiful view, and everything's hopefully going well. But it was probably the lowest moment in my life. Don't pull the trigger.
My heart was soft. I mean, there wasn't any next time to the spacewalks. It was either now or never. And that screw was stuck.
Wow. Wow! I haven't seen that footage until sitting here with you. And it's been 5 years almost. And it brings back the emotion of that time. These images are coming live from the International Space Station. And that is a beautiful, beautiful sight.
Hello, welcome to the International Space Station.
Mike, great to have you with us. It's great to be here. Such a pleasure to meet you. It's quite a big chat. So, is it kind of in a weird way? Is it nice having back so you get a bit more room, a bit more space?
Well, yeah, we get a little more time on the exercise equipment, that's for sure. It's just gorgeous, and we never get bored watching the beautiful home planet passing by underneath.
My impression is the thoughts were, this is what the view from heaven could be like.
So now we're out of turn, to be honest with you.
Yeah, you're right, you're caught me in the loop here right now.
Because we're friends, not just colleagues. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure and a privilege to share your life for the last week or so on Space Season. And it's just given us a great insight and it's very comfortable. Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure being with you. Thank you very much.
Excellent, amazing stuff. So, only remains to say thanks very much, David Glover. Thanks a lot, Tom. Thanks, Sally. Thanks, Mark. Thanks very much, Nick and Annabelle. And thank you all for coming along. Thanks a lot.